Hey everybody, another 9.5 test video here. I finally got a match that was worth showing. Well, I use the term worth showing very loosely here, but a match that I was actually motivated to make a video of in the Firefly. Quick thing to point out, the enemy team do not actually have 3 artillery pieces. There is a slight mistake on Wargaming's behalf. The Achilles is listed as an artillery piece.
Let's get this show on the road.
I assume that's not intentional. So anyway, let's take a look at this tank. It's obviously a Sherman. It's a Sherman Firefly, so it's pretty similar to the Sherman. It has the same kind of mobility. It's not really fast, but it's mobile. You know, it's got a similar armor scheme. I think it's slightly up armored. The British, as you can see, welded armor plates to the sides of the tank in certain important locations. I assume that's reflected in its damage model. I do not have Tank Inspector up and running at the moment because it has an alarming tendency to freeze and crash out. So I'm going to have to just go off guesswork for now. If you want to see the actual armor scheme, you should probably go watch somebody who produces more professional videos than me, like Quickie or Jingles or somebody else. Because you won't be seeing that here. And now, it will sometimes bounce things, but I wouldn't count on its armor. Something I would like to point out now, actually, before I get too carried away with other shit, is that it does suffer in the gun depression department because of this massive 17-pounder. As you can see, I can't actually depress my gun enough to hit that KV-85 without driving all the way up here into the open. Also notice the fairly extreme angles that the Firefly can pen itself at. Now, part of that is because the 17-pounder is an immensely powerful gun at this tier. Part of that is because it doesn't really have a whole lot of hull armor. So I actually did bounce there. I hit the lower part of the KV-85's gun mantlet where it bulges out. That was never really going to pan. Notice the Lend-Lease Sherman also gets a derp gun, which seems to be just as effective as it is on the American Sherman. Also notice that the suspension arms on this thing move, unlike Fury's, which leads me to wonder if Wargaming will actually ever go back and make Fury's suspension work properly like the other HD models do. Who knows? So having dealt with the tanks in the middle, I decided to get a little ballsy and head into town by myself. I catch a T-34-85 seemingly alone and in a relatively unsafe spot, track him on the corner, and although the T-34-85 has a very high DPM gun, he's unable to get a shot off before I finish him. Maybe he had a dead loader or something. I completely whiff on that Achilles, and then realize that there's a Firefly on my flank. Situational awareness is too hard for me, apparently. I then accidentally reverse over the edge of this platform, and then, wow. That poor KV-2, he has to go wash the bat off of his tank. Again, you can see just how easily this gun deals with Shermans. Firefly or regular, it doesn't really care. But again, it's a fairly fragile tank. And the KV-2 says he was lagging there. He says ping. So, either way, it was amusing. So this wasn't really a huge game. It was just a case of this is the only really presentable game I have in the Firefly where I was able to shoot my gun a couple of times and then something comedic happened, so honestly, that's all I care about. And I'm sure I just butchered that sentence, but I was trying to tell the KV that I also have ping issues. So, thoughts on the Firefly are basically irrelevant since the Firefly is pretty much placeholder stats, and it's probably going to be nerfed into the ground before it hits the live server. Remembering what I've said in my previous videos, the Firefly has DPM more on par with something like a T-54 than any other Tier 6 medium. Also on that point, it has far higher DPM than the Challenger tank destroyer, which follows on from it. I think what happened was Wargaming basically copy-pasted stats from the existing Shermans to create the Firefly. Apparently this was a test of the visual models or something, which is bizarre, because you'd think that Wargaming would do things the other way around. If they were going to test a placeholder, it would be a placeholder visual model with the intended stats, but apparently not. I don't know what the logic behind it was, but Wargaming decided to test placeholder stats with what they want to be the final physical model. And on that note, I should point out that the Firefly and the T-55 NVA, which I haven't actually seen in game, but which I've seen in Quickie Baby's video, so I'm assuming he has roughly the same graphic settings as me, or, you know, like good graphic settings. Some parts of the model have errors on them. The additional side applique armor on the Firefly appears black from a distance, and similarly on the T-55 NVA, some of the external stowage boxes on the side of the turret have smoothing errors on them, so when it turns its turret certain directions and the light hits it from a particular angle, it looks really messed up. If you do any sort of 3D stuff and you know what a smoothing error looks like, it does that. Otherwise, just try and picture like it suddenly turns, you know, from a normally lit looking thing, half of it turns black and the other half is normal. It's just because of the way that it renders. It's I can't explain it because I'm not a proper 3D artist. I just sometimes mess around in 3ds Max. I'm sure somebody will be able to explain it better than me, but suffice to say, it does look a bit wonky. And I'm sure at some point Wargaming will fix it, because so far most of the visual models have been very good looking, and they've actually been steadily fixing small errors with them over the last several patches, so I'm sure it will be fixed. It is really curious though, the way they decide to test this thing, and from what I've heard, the rest of the British Lend-Lease medium line is also placeholder. But I'm going to pass some finalised judgments on the tree, even though I know that there are placeholder stats involved, because it's pretty obvious from the modules what Wargaming are trying to aim for with these things, and so I can make some broad judgments. Basically, the selling point of the British Lend-Lease mediums is that you have tanks you already know from the American line, but now with British guns. If you go through and look on the tech tree, the Stuart has the 2-pounder gun, which is what makes the Tetrarch so fierce, and the Matilda. The Sherman and the Grant have the 6-pounder gun, which is one of the best guns in low-tier tanks, period. And then, of course, the Firefly gets a 17-pounder. So, although they are, you know, ostensibly the same tanks as the Americans already have, even if every other stat is the same, the inclusion of the British guns with their much higher penetration values will mean that these tanks have a much easier time if they get dragged up into a higher tier match. So from the perspective of not wanting to get fucked over in a tier 7 or 8 match, the British tanks are a bit better equipped for it than the US tanks. With that said, again, placeholder stats, so they may lose out in some other way, but for now I would imagine they're going to be in a slightly better position than their American cousins, and we'll have to wait and see how Wargaming balance that out, because it is a significant advantage over the Americans, who, at least the middle parts of their tree, they haven't had any real changes implemented since they were added to the game, other than obviously the nerfing of the 105mm gun. And so power creep is becoming something of a problem for the US tree. It's becoming something of a problem for a lot of the older tanks in the game, but the American medium line, other than, as I said, the nerfing of the 105mm gun and the introduction of tier 10 mediums and what that did to the higher tiers, it hasn't really been touched since... when was it they were added? Late beta, I think. I can't remember if it was before or after the game went from closed beta to open beta, but I remember it was quite late in the beta cycle that the Americans were added. and a lot of their tanks haven't really been changed drastically since then. There have been small buffs and nerfs here and there, but nothing really noticeable. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens with this, because the difference between having a 75mm gun that doesn't really pen so well, or a 6-pounder in the Grant, for example, you actually have the chance at making something which is functionally the same tank as the Lee very effective when it's brought up into a tier 6 match, whereas most Lee drivers will be punching their screens if they see things like KV-85s and ARLs and some of the more heavily armored tier 6s. The Grant drivers will not have a problem because they have the 6-pounder, and the 6-pounder will quite happily cut holes through anything in tier 6 pretty much. If not with AP, then certainly with gold. Again, with the Sherman, the Lend-Lease Sherman, the 6-pounder is perhaps a more optimal gun, I would say, still than the 76mm. Although the 76mm is not a bad gun, the 6-pounder, as it's installed on a lot of the existing tier 5s, is pretty strong. So we'll have to see how the balance in that one goes, but I think in the case of the Grant, absolutely, certainly it will be a huge advantage over the Lee. And in the case of the Stuart, again, I think that the 2-pounder gun, which, if you remember correctly, will penetrate most things up to tier 7 with good aim and some gold, that's again a huge advantage to that tank, and it will be a big leg up over the American M5. Anyway, thank you for watching. I've got one more video which I've recorded so far from test. There may be more in the future depending how many more test sessions I get in. There may not, I don't know. But the other one I want to upload is not going to be commentated. It's just a short comedy video showing just how balanced the E25 is, and it's about the only decent piece of Archer footage I could actually get, which really says something when you see what it is. Then I've got a bunch of my own replays from 9.4 to upload, or to record, sorry. I'm still actually in the process of uploading 9.3 replays, so again I built up a big backlog. Whoops. And I've got a shit ton of Goon replays I want to go through and sort them out and maybe upload a couple of them. Anyway, thank you for watching. As ever, I wish you the best of luck in the field, and I'll see you next time.